on, it's time for a blast from the past. Da-da-da! Behold, DEATHBRINGER. This was a game I made in 2007, soon after I had actually started making games. At the time, it was my live stream to make a stompy robot fighting game like MechWarrior. Not much has really changed in that regard. But back then, Unity was not a thing at all. I don't think it was available in 2007, or if it was on other platforms. So what I did was I learned that GameMaker 7 had the ability to display 3D graphics, which blew my tiny mind. As a result, I was absolutely obsessed with creating a full 3D mech game in GameMaker. Well, there we go. As you can see, it's quite rudimentary. What I didn't realize when I started with DEATHBRINGER was that although GameMaker had the ability to display 3D graphics, being a 3D engine at its core, all the other things like 3D movement, rotation, positioning, collision detection, animation, none of those things actually existed in the engine. And if I wanted to do it, I had to implement it myself. What I ended up doing was, firstly, I found myself a fantastic import script on the interwebs. Wow! No, die in a fire. I found myself an excellent import script on the interwebs that could import 3D models into the sort of native GameMaker format from .obj files, .obj files. So what I would do is I would build these models in Blender and then export them and use Blender to import them. Beg your pardon, GameMaker to import them. So that at least took care of the modeling. Otherwise, GameMaker insists that you basically import models vertex by vertex, face by face, defining them in code. That's an absolute horror. That was the first hurdle to overcome. And that was great for static objects like these buildings and all of that. But in terms of the mechs, it was a little bit more complicated. The buildings, the entire game actually takes place as a 2.5D thing, being, Blender. I think I have a hot switch here. There we go. You can actually see here, these are the collision masks, the 2D bitmap collision masks for these buildings. And all I did was, for 3D objects in this world, I let the shape be defined by the mask, and basically just gave them a height. And whenever I fired projectiles or checked for collisions, I would just check the projectile's height versus the hitbox that I defined, and that would determine whether it had hit or not. So really rudimentary, but for the purposes of this prototype, it actually worked pretty well. Meant, of course, that I couldn't do sort of full 3D terrain or anything like that, but hey, baby steps. As for the animations, let's just get an external camera. Now you can see here that the animations are actually pretty poor. And the reason for that is actually quite justifiable, in that GameMaker not having any sort of animation system required that I import each component of the mech, in other words, all the leg components and the torso and all of that you can see there, as individual models and transform them individually in code. So this run animation that you can see here has actually been handled 100% via script. There's no skeletal animation system, no predefined thing. It's just transforms, oscillating pendulum motion mapped to rotations. So really impressive, sort of mathematically, for a nascent game developer who was only first dipping into 3D development. But yeah, aesthetically, kind of it worked. I was quite pleased with myself when I got that running. I'm trying to remember what these things do. As I recall, these were supposed to be like resupply pads or something scattered about. You could step on them to replenish. Oh yes, this is a health one. And then there are red ones that are like ammo ones. Another thing you can see here is like Ultrarena, which is what this game would eventually become. Like it's 8 years, yes, 8 years later, there are these pickups that would, in this case, I think they only replenished ammunition. And that moves on to the core conceit of this game. I mean, for now, it's sort of like a first-person shooter with robots, yeah? Um, I mean, you can see this mouse look sort of strafing. It's just, it's not really much of a simulation. But the core conceit of this was that the weapons that your mech was outfitted with were actually upgradable as the game moved on within the same match. So you would start a match and you would start killing enemy mechs, and as you went, you would collect some resource. I never actually defined what. And the idea was that you could take your existing loadout and upgrade them via a tech tree. So for instance, you can see here I've been spawned by default with just sort of like this pulse laser, right? What I could do is at any time during the match, and I never did implement the resource system, as I said, you could select an upgrade and sort of fire it up, and that would give you, for instance, a beam cannon. So the idea was that there was this constant war of attrition in terms of killing guys and upgrading your weapons versus the other guy. Very RTS. Now, obviously, I was a nascent designer. I mean, I'd only started, although I'd wanted to make games for a long time. I only really had the tools to do so in like October 2006. So I was still an absolute newbie designer. And the design implications of this sort of system still hadn't occurred to me. It was just making something that sounded really cool. Of course, I mean, now I look at it and I think, what was I thinking? But it was pretty cool at the time. Grief, let's take him out. I mean, I had no hit. But the only cool special effect I had was that explosion animation, and that was already pretty poor. I mean, the fact that Game Maker was so poor for, easy 3D assets and all of that was part of the reason why I abandoned this project in the first place. I mean, you wanted to put something new in, you needed to build it in Blender, you needed to get a hit mask going, you needed to... It was a pain. However, I'm pleased because it taught me a lot about 3D and 3D maths. I mean, my trig was practically non-existent when I started the project, and by the end of it, just deriving the maths to fire lasers at an angle in 3 dimensions. I mean, that did wonders. It taught me a hell of a lot. Stuff I still use to this day. No matrices in Game Maker's, friends. No quaternions or vector 3s or any of those lovely constructs. No. I had to do this the hard way. Gimbal lock and all. Let's upgrade that. Yay! Yay! I'm still quite proud of this AI. This was the first AI I ever wrote. Proper AI, combat AI. And I mean, it's thick as it's thick as 2 short planks ultimately, but I mean it's good enough to sort of find you and strafe around you and try at least to move unpredictably so that you have to maneuver around it. So, I mean, it did the job, even though and it would run around searching for for enemies and then go into sort of like combat mode. In fact, that's what that little dunce cap that you see above them is, as I recall, is that that was my marker for what state the AI was in at the time. Whoop. Man, I learned so much about 3D here. Like, just getting these buildings to display properly. I had no idea about draw depths at the time. I had no idea about clipping planes. I had no idea about the Z buffers. So I had this camera with a frustum that projected all the way up and then wondered why I was getting Z fighting, even though I had no idea what Z fighting was at the time. I learned so much doing this game. You'll also notice that the sort of energy ammo dichotomy that I've got going in Ultrarena is reflected here in those two bars at the bottom left. The idea was that I had, although in that case I had sort of a ammunition and energy, ammo mass and energy. And ammo mass was sort of a shared resource between your guns, which was really a thick thing to do. And energy was energy, as you can see, doesn't actually replenish over time. The idea was that you would use up all your energies. Oops. You would use up all your energies and then wait for it to recharge. Now, that was supposed to instill strategy somehow, but considering that there was no way to actually replenish your energy without depleting it first, like I say, I was a newbie. Oh, look, he's run off the world. Note the complete and utter lack of gravity. Tee-hee. And I have to wait for my energy to recharge. For no apparent reason. There we go. So yes, this is Deathbringer. This was my first foray into 3D game development. This was my first attempt at basically shoehorning stuff that shouldn't exist in Game Maker into Game Maker. Although it taught me a lot, it wasn't until Unity came out and I had grown a fair bit as a designer that I could use the lesson. Oh, chunklets! I'd forgotten I'd done those. It wasn't until 8 years later that the tools and such and design expertise came along for me to try to attempt this. And I mean, Ultrarena is such a better game all around compared to this. Firstly, because the tools are so much better, and Unity is just a marvel. I would have killed for that when I was, 8 years ago when I did this. And secondly, I'm just a better designer. I know more about things now. And but those things I would not know had I not attempted this. So, very cool. Thank you for listening to my ramblings. I think there's another, Vesuvius cannon. I wonder what this does. Brrr. But thank you for listening to my ramblings about one of my old projects. And do stay tuned for more videos on the update of Red Hot Robot Ultrarena. This thing's distant and far superior cousin.